Please buy our puppy? The little girl whispered. She didn't know he was the black CEO who'd fired her mom last month. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Ms. Vance. Not a minute more. The pounding rain hammered against the thin glass of the apartment window, a relentless assault that mirrored the fierce thudding in Alara Vance's chest. Each drop that splattered and slid down the pane felt like a tear for the life that was dissolving around her. A cold and unforgiving torrent washing away the last remnants of her stability. The gray, oppressive sky pressed down on the city, smothering the world in a heavy fog that seemed to seep through the window frames and into the small, threadbare living room where every object spoke of dignified struggle. A worn armchair with its stuffing peeking through a tear in the armrest stood sentinel in one corner, a silent testament to years of weary evenings. Beside it, a flickering lamp cast a weak, amber hue, creating long, dancing shadows that made the room feel even more hollow. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and brewing despair. Alara stood motionless in the center of it all, the eviction notice a brittle, cruel piece of paper clutched in her trembling hand. She felt frozen. She stared at the words, but they swam before her glistening eyes, the black ink a cruel mockery of the formal, impersonal notice that had ended her career just 1 month prior. The corporate letterhead of Blackwood Enterprises had been crisp and expensive, the language polite and sterile, but the result was the same: termination, downsizing, a strategic restructuring. Those were the words they used, words that sanitized the brutal reality of a single mother, suddenly cast adrift in a city that had no mercy for the unfortunate. Now, this new paper, cheap and wrinkled, delivered by a landlord with a sneer, felt like the final nail in a coffin she hadn't even realized was being built around her. Her shoulders slumped, the weight of a future she could no longer imagine pressing down on her with unbearable force. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain and the soft, ragged sound of her own breathing. Everything felt fragile. From the doorway of the tiny bedroom, a small voice cut through the heavy quiet, pure and innocent. "Mommy? Is Mr. Abernathy gone?" 7-year-old Lily stood there, her small frame wrapped in a faded pink sweater, her wide, trusting eyes fixed on her mother's pale face. In her arms, she cradled a squirming ball of golden fur, the last puppy of their beloved retriever Bella's litter. He was a tiny creature of boundless joy, a stark contrast to the gloom that had taken root in their home. They had sold his 4 siblings over the past weeks, each sale a painful necessity that paid for another week of groceries, another bill staved off. This last one, whom Lily had named Sunshine, was their final hope. The money from his sale was meant for the rent, the very rent that was now irrevocably late. A sob caught in Alara's throat, sharp and raw. She swallowed it down, forcing a smile that felt like shattered glass. "Yes, sweetie. He's gone." Lily's own small face, a perfect mirror of Alara's, clouded with worry. "Did he like the money we saved?" Alara's carefully constructed composure splintered. She knelt, pulling her daughter into a fierce, desperate hug, burying her face in Lily's soft hair to hide the tears that now fell freely. The warmth of her child, the soft weight of her in her arms, was the only anchor she had left. She was failing her. Later, after a meager dinner of leftover soup and the last of the bread, Alara sat by the window, watching the rain finally soften into a miserable drizzle. The eviction notice lay on the small table beside her like a verdict. They had nowhere to go. No family left to call, no friends with enough space or resources to take them in. There was only the $87 in a chipped teacup in the kitchen, and the small, sleeping puppy in a cardboard box lined with a soft blanket. Her gaze fell upon the box. Sunshine. It was a ridiculous name for a creature born into such a storm, but Lily had been insistent. "He looks like a little piece of the sun, Mommy," she'd said, and in that moment Alara had seen it too. A tiny, warm, living piece of hope. But hope didn't pay the rent. Hope didn't put a roof over their heads. A quiet resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach, a decision as painful as it was necessary. She would take Lily and the puppy to the park tomorrow, rain or shine. She would find a buyer. She had to. It was their only chance. She stroked the worn fabric of the armchair, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. A single, cold tear traced a path down her cheek. The night deepened. The next day, the sky remained a uniform, sorrowful gray, but the rain had ceased, leaving behind a city that smelled of wet pavement and earth. A biting cold had settled in its place, a damp chill that clung to their clothes and seeped into their bones. Alara held Lily's small hand tightly, her own fingers numb inside thin, threadbare gloves. In her other arm, she carried the cardboard box, the puppy a warm, precious weight against her side. They found a spot on a bench near the main path of Central Park, the ground around them littered with damp, fallen leaves. Lily, ever the optimist, had insisted on tying a bright yellow ribbon around the puppy's neck. "So he looks his best for his new family," she explained, her voice serious and small. Alara's heart cracked a little more. She watched the people passing by, businessmen with their faces buried in phones, nannies pushing expensive strollers, tourists with cameras. They were ghosts from another world, a world of security and purpose that felt a universe away from her own desperate reality. No one gave them more than a passing glance. The quiet desperation was a cloak of invisibility. A man walked towards them, his pace slow and aimless, his shoulders slumped forward under a simple, dark coat. He wasn't like the others. There was no phone, no briefcase, no destination in his eyes. His gaze was fixed on the ground, his face gaunt and haunted, etched with a grief so profound it seemed to create its own gravitational pull. As he drew nearer, Alara saw the deep, hollow shadows under his eyes, the unshaven roughness on his jaw. He looked like a man who had lost everything. He didn't seem to notice them until he was almost directly in front of their bench, and his gaze lifted, catching on the small, golden creature peeking over the edge of the box. He froze. For a long, silent moment, he just stared, his chest rising and falling with a single, deep breath. The world seemed to fall away, the sounds of the city fading into a soft hush, leaving only the three of them and a small, hopeful puppy in a bubble of unspoken emotion. This man, Damien Blackwood, the formidable CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, did not know that the woman before him was a casualty of his own detached signature. He only knew that the sight of the small, innocent life before him had struck him with the force of a physical blow, a painful, tender memory of another small, bright life that had been extinguished far too soon. It was the anniversary of his son's death. Leo would have been 7, just like the little girl now watching him with wide, curious eyes. Lily, sensing the man's raw sadness with the uncanny empathy of a child, slipped her hand from her mother's. She took a hesitant step forward, holding up the box. Her voice was a soft whisper, barely audible above the rustle of the leaves. "Please buy our puppy." Alara's heart thudded. She started to pull Lily back, to apologize for the intrusion, but the man's eyes, glistening with an unshed sorrow, stopped her. They weren't angry or annoyed. They were shattered. Lily continued, her voice gaining a gentle confidence. "His name is Sunshine. He can make you feel better. He gives the best cuddles when you're sad." Alara watched, a lump forming in her throat. Her own child, who was about to lose her home, was trying to comfort this complete stranger. It was a moment of such pure, selfless innocence that it felt sacred. Damien's mask of pained indifference finally cracked. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. He knelt, his movements slow and stiff, bringing himself down to Lily's level. He reached out a trembling hand, not for the puppy, but to gently touch the yellow ribbon. The fabric was a jolt of impossible color in the gray landscape of his grief. He looked from the puppy to Alara, and in her weary, dignified face, he saw not a beggar, but a fellow sufferer. "How much?" he asked, his voice thick and rough. Alara's mind raced. The $200 she needed, the desperation that clawed at her. But looking at this man's unbearable pain, the words died on her lips. A seismic shift happened within her. She couldn't bring herself to profit from his grief. It felt wrong, a violation of the fragile, human moment that had unfolded between them. Her own suffering felt suddenly secondary to his. "Whatever you have," she heard herself say, the words soft but steady. "Just give him a good home. That's all that matters." The man stared at her, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. In his world, everything had a price. Every transaction was a negotiation, a battle of wills. This selfless gesture, this act of pure, unsolicited kindness from a woman who clearly had so little, was so unexpected it short-circuited his cynical, grief-addled brain. It was a flicker of light in a cavernous darkness, a moment of grace he hadn't known he was starving for. He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers closing around the wad of cash he'd withdrawn from an ATM without thinking. A meaningless sum he'd intended to, he didn't even know what. He pulled it out and pressed the crumpled bills into Alara's hand without looking at them. He then gently took the cardboard box from Lily's small arms. He didn't say thank you. He couldn't. The words were trapped behind a wall of emotion too immense to scale. He simply looked at Alara, a silent, profound promise passing between them, before he turned and walked away, clutching the box as if it contained the most precious thing in the world. He was gone. Alara opened her hand and stared at the money. It was more than she had hoped for, nearly $500. A wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy washed over her. It was enough. They were safe. She didn't know it yet, but that single, selfless act had set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably alter the course of her life, saving her in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. For now, there was only the cold, empty space in her arms, and the crinkled bills that felt like both a blessing and a loss. Alara and Lily walked home, the biting cold seeming less sharp now, blunted by the fragile shield of relief. The streets they traversed, usually so menacing in their indifference, now seemed almost hopeful, the gray facades of the buildings softened by the promise of safety. Lily was quiet, her small hand tucked into Alara's, her thoughts clearly on the little ball of fur now in a stranger's care. "Do you think he'll give him a good bed, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small and laced with a child's practical concern. "And lots of toys?" Alara squeezed her hand, her own heart aching with a strange mix of profound relief and a deep, hollow pang of loss. "I think he'll give him the best bed in the whole world, sweetie," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "That man, he needed sunshine. You saw it, didn't you?" Lily nodded solemnly, her youthful wisdom cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "His eyes were rainy," she said. Alara's throat tightened. His eyes were rainy. It was the perfect description for the deep, storming grief she had witnessed. The money in her pocket felt heavy, a tangible weight of salvation. She mentally rehearsed her conversation with Mr. Abernathy, the landlord. She would be calm, dignified. She would hand him the full 2 months' rent he demanded, plus the late fees. The thought of his sneering face twisting into surprise was a small, satisfying spark in the gloom. They arrived at their apartment building, a tired-looking brick structure that had seen better decades. The lobby was dim and smelled of dust and disinfectant, a sterile silence hanging in the air. As they waited for the slow, creaking elevator, Alara felt a tremor of unease. It was too quiet. The usual sounds of the building, a distant television, the muffled arguments of the couple in 3B, the scampering of Mrs. Henderson's cat, were absent. A heavy sense of foreboding settled over her. When the elevator doors opened onto their floor, she saw him immediately. Mr. Abernathy stood directly in front of their door, his arms crossed over his portly chest, his face a mask of smug impatience. He wasn't alone. 2 large, burly men stood behind him, their expressions blank and imposing. They looked less like movers and more like thugs. The foil to her fragile hope had arrived sooner than expected. He had not waited for the 24 hours to elapse. Total silence. Well, look what the cat dragged in," Mr. Abernathy sneered, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "I thought I told you to be packing." Alara's blood ran cold. She pushed Lily gently behind her, a protective instinct flaring hot and fierce in her chest. "I have your money, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. The full amount. Just as you asked, she reached into her coat, her fingers closing around the wad of cash, the precious bills that were supposed to be their salvation. Mr. Abernathy let out a short, cruel laugh. A little late for that, Ms. Vance. The eviction was filed this morning. The judge signed off an hour ago. It's out of my hands. He gestured dismissively with a flick of his wrist. These gentlemen are here to ensure the premises are vacated. Immediately, panic, cold and sharp, splintered through Alara's carefully held composure. But you said, you gave me 24 hours, she gasped, her voice cracking. That was before a new tenant offered me 6 months rent up front in cash, he said, his eyes gleaming with avarice. Business is business. Now, are you going to leave peacefully, or are we going to have a problem? The two men behind him took a step forward. This was it, the final, brutal blow. The hope she had clung to for the last hour vanished, turning to ash in her mouth. She was not just being evicted. She was being thrown out, humiliated, with all her neighbors as potential witnesses to her ruin. She felt Lily trembling behind her. The money in her hand was now worthless, a cruel reminder of a hope that had been born and died in the space of a single afternoon. They were homeless. Meanwhile, miles away in a stately penthouse apartment overlooking the park, Damian Blackwood was experiencing a seismic shift of his own. The cavernous living room, usually a monument to his sterile, isolated grief, felt different. Warmer. The source of this change was curled up on a plush velvet cushion near the fireplace. A tiny golden puppy sleeping soundly, its small chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Damian sat in a polished marble armchair, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table beside him, and simply watched. He had named the puppy Leo after his son. The act felt both deeply painful and profoundly cathartic. For the first time in 3 years, the crushing silence of the apartment was not empty. It was filled with the gentle presence of another living, breathing soul. The woman's face swam in his mind's eye, her quiet dignity, her weary but unwavering gaze, and her words echoed in his ears. Whatever you have, just give him a good home. It was an act of grace so pure it defied all the logic of his transactional world, a world where everyone wanted something. She had wanted only to ease his pain. It was a debt he felt compelled to repay, not with money, but with a restoration of the security that life had so clearly stolen from her. He picked up his phone and called his head of security, a man whose loyalty was absolute. "Mark," he said, his voice crisp and commanding, "I have a task for you. It's personal, and it's my highest priority." He described the woman and her child, the location in the park, the approximate time. "Find her," he commanded. "I need to know everything. Her name, her address, her circumstances. And I need to know it by morning." He hung up, a renewed purpose hardening his features. He didn't know what hardship she was facing, but he knew with an undeniable certainty that he was about to become her hidden savior. The thought did not feel like charity. It felt like salvation, his own. The report from his security chief landed on Damian's desk the next morning, a slim, discreet file that held the sum of Alara Vance's life. He read it in his sleek, minimalist office, the panoramic view of the city a stark backdrop to the story of quiet desperation contained within the pages. Her name, her address, her late husband, a teacher who had died of a sudden illness 2 years prior. And then, the gut punch, her employment history. Last employer, Blackwood Enterprises. Termination date, 1 month ago. Reason, redundancy. Layoff list B7, part of the Q3 strategic restructuring he had personally signed off on. A wave of nausea rolled through him. He, Damian Blackwood, was the architect of her ruin. He had signed a paper, a sterile document full of numbers and projections, and in doing so, had pushed this dignified, selfless woman and her innocent child to the brink of homelessness. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. She had offered him solace in his grief, even as he was the hidden cause of hers. The file continued, each detail a fresh twist of the knife. The eviction notice. The landlord's name, Arthur Abernathy, a man with a reputation for predatory practices. The final, crushing detail. The eviction was scheduled to be carried out today. He looked at the clock on his wall. It was already past noon. He imagined her returning to her apartment, full of hope from the money he'd given her, only to be thrown out onto the street. The thought was unbearable. He grabbed his phone, his movements sharp and decisive. His first call was to his personal wealth manager. "I want you to buy a residential building," he said, his voice a low growl. "Apartment complex at 412 Elm Street. The owner is Arthur Abernathy. I don't care what it costs. I want the deal closed by the end of the day. And I want him to have no idea who the buyer is until I tell him myself." His second call was to a high-end concierge service he kept on retainer. "I need an anonymous delivery made. Groceries. Enough for a month. And toys. For a 7-year-old girl. Have it delivered to this address." He rattled off Alara's details. The gift note should say it's from the Community Sunshine Fund. He was moving pieces on a chessboard she didn't even know she was on, erecting a fortress of safety around her without her knowledge. It was a secret intervention, a silent promise to undo the damage he had unintentionally caused. He would not let her fall. He would catch her, and she would never even see his hands. Alara and Lily sat on the cold stone steps of the public library, the only place Alara could think to go that was warm and free. Their meager belongings were stuffed into 2 reusable grocery bags at their feet, a pathetic collection of their most essential possessions grabbed in a frantic, tear-filled rush as Mr. Abernathy's men stood over them. The humiliation was a raw, open wound. She had tried to call shelters, but the lines were full, the voices on the other end sympathetic but helpless. The $500 was still in her pocket, a sum that now felt both enormous and useless. Could buy them a week in a cheap motel, but what then? She was at the bottom of a hole so deep she couldn't see the light. Lily, ever resilient, was surprisingly calm, nestled against Alara's side and quietly reading a picture book she'd grabbed from her room. But Alara could feel the slight, intermittent trembling in her small body, the unspoken fear that she was trying so hard to be brave about. A wave of love so fierce it hurt washed over Alara. She would not let her daughter see her break. She had to be strong. Just then, her phone, a cheap model with a cracked screen, buzzed with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was a spam call, but some instinct made her answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice weary. "Is this Ms. Alara Vance?" A polite, professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah, and I'm calling from the property management office of your building." Alara's heart sank. They were probably calling to tell her she'd left something behind. "I'm no longer a resident there," she said, the words tasting like defeat. "Actually, that's why I'm calling." The voice continued, cheerful and bright. "There seems to have been a mistake with your eviction. The building has just come under new ownership, and the new owner has reviewed your case. He's voided the eviction entirely. Your lease is reinstated." Effective immediately, Alara froze. The phone pressed hard against her ear. "What? I don't understand. It's all been taken care of, Ms. Vance. Your rent for the next 6 months has also been paid in full by an anonymous donation from a group called the Community Sunshine Fund. You're welcome to return to your apartment whenever you're ready. Your key will still work." The world tilted on its axis. It was impossible. A mistake. A cruel joke. Is this real?" she stammered, her voice a disbelieving whisper. "Perfectly real, ma'am. Welcome home." The line clicked dead. Alara stared at her phone, her mind reeling. Anonymous donation? New owner? It made no sense. It was a miracle, a bewildering, inexplicable miracle. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of shock, of confusion, and of a fragile, burgeoning hope. Someone somewhere had just saved them. Returning to the apartment felt surreal, like stepping into a dream. The door opened with a soft click, revealing their small living room, exactly as they had left it. But it was not entirely the same. Stacked neatly by the kitchen counter were dozens of grocery bags, overflowing with fresh produce, pasta, milk, and bread. And on the armchair, nestled amongst a pile of new, fluffy blankets, was a large, beautifully wrapped box with a bright yellow ribbon. Lily gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. She ran to the box and tore it open, revealing a treasure trove of art supplies, books, and a brand new doll. It was more than she'd had for her last birthday. Alara stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, completely overwhelmed. The Community Sunshine Fund. The name echoed in her head. Sunshine. A coincidence? Couldn't be. Her mind flew back to the park, to the haunted, sad-eyed man who had taken their puppy. Could it be him? The idea was absurd. He was a stranger, a fleeting encounter. And yet, the connection felt undeniable. The timing, the name. A seed of a thought was planted. A wild, improbable theory that she barely dared to entertain. Whoever this hidden savior was, they had given her more than just rent and groceries. They had given her breathing room. They had given her a chance. That night, for the first time in months, Alara slept soundly, wrapped in one of the new, warm blankets, with her daughter safe in the next room. She dreamt of golden fur and kind, rainy eyes. A few days later, a tentative stability had settled over their lives. The fear of imminent homelessness had receded, replaced by a quiet, lingering sense of wonder and gratitude. Alara spent her mornings tirelessly applying for jobs, her resolve bolstered by the mysterious safety net that had appeared beneath them. In the afternoons, she would take Lily to the park, the same park where their lives had so strangely pivoted. It felt like a pilgrimage of sorts, a way to subconsciously thank the universe, or the sad-eyed stranger, for their deliverance. It was on one of these afternoons, under a sky that had finally cleared to a brilliant, crisp blue, that she saw him again. He was sitting on their bench, a book open in his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was watching a familiar golden puppy chase a bright red ball across the grass. Leo. The puppy had grown, his legs longer, his paws bigger, but the joyful, boundless energy was the same. Before Alara could even process the sight, Lily let out a cry of pure delight. Sunshine! She dropped Alara's hand and ran across the lawn, her laughter echoing in the clear autumn air. The man, Damien, looked up, a slow, gentle smile spreading across his face, as Lily skidded to a halt and threw her arms around the puppy's neck. He looked different today. He was wearing a well-tailored sweater and dark trousers, and the haunted, gaunt look was gone, replaced by a calm, quiet warmth. His eyes, when they met Alara's across the grass, were no longer rainy. They were clear. He stood up as Alara approached, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. Nervousness, perhaps? I was hoping I might see you here, he said, his voice smoother and deeper than she remembered. I wanted to thank you properly. You and your daughter. Alara's heart beat a little faster. It's good to see him looking so happy, she said, gesturing toward the wiggling puppy. And you too. You look better. A shadow of the old pain crossed his face, fleeting but real. I am, he said simply. He helped. Leo. I named him Leo. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching Lily and Leo tumble on the grass. This was her chance to ask, to voice the wild suspicion that had been growing in her mind. The Community Sunshine Fund, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Was that you? Damien's gaze was steady, unwavering. He didn't confirm or deny it, but a soft, knowing look in his eyes was all the answer she needed. He changed the subject, gesturing to the bench. Please, sit with me. This was the beginning of their reconnection, the first step in forging a bond. They talked for over an hour, carefully avoiding the topics of work or money, instead sharing small, safe pieces of themselves. She told him about her late husband's love for teaching, and he told her about his own childhood love for building model airplanes. It was a conversation woven from shared humanity, not circumstance. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, he turned to her. I know this is forward, he said, his voice earnest, but I'd like to see you again. And Lily, perhaps we could all get dinner this week. Alara's logical mind screamed that it was foolish, that she knew nothing about this man. But her heart, The same heart that had prompted her to give away her last hope for a stranger's comfort told her to say yes. There was a tender, unspoken connection between them, a fragile thread spun from a shared moment of grief and grace. "I'd like that very much," she said, a genuine smile reaching her eyes for the first time in a very long time. That evening, back in the quiet safety of their apartment, Alara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. They had made plans to meet for dinner on Friday. The simple act of having something to look forward to felt like a luxury. Later, as she tucked Lily into bed, her daughter's words sent a jolt through her. "Damien has sad eyes like you, Mommy," Lily said drowsily, her cheek pressed against her pillow. "But when he looks at Leo, they get smiley." Alara froze. Damien. She had never told Lily his name. He must have introduced himself when she ran over. The name felt solid, real. Damien. Over the next few days, Alara found herself replaying their conversation, analyzing his kind eyes, his gentle smile. The mystery of him was compelling. He was clearly a man of some means, judging by his clothes and calm confidence, yet he had appeared to them at his most broken. On Friday, Alara dressed with more care than she had in years, choosing a simple blue dress she hadn't worn since before her husband passed away. When Damien arrived at their building to pick them up, he wasn't in a simple sweater. He was wearing an impeccably tailored dark suit, his presence commanding and stately. He looked like he had just stepped out of a boardroom. He smiled warmly, putting them at ease, but Alara couldn't shake the feeling that there were layers to this man she couldn't begin to comprehend. Just as they were about to leave the small courtyard of her building, a grating voice shattered the peaceful evening. "Well, look at this. Finally landed yourself a rich one. Did you, Vance?" It was Mr. Abernathy, the landlord. He was lurking by the dumpsters, his face flushed with anger and cheap whiskey. He must have seen Damien's sleek, black car parked at the curb. His eyes, small and mean, raked over Alara with contempt. "I knew you were no good. Probably had this one lined up all along." Playing the poor, pathetic single mother, the public humiliation was swift and brutal. Alara's face burned with shame, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. She stood, dignified but visibly overwhelmed, shielding Lily from the man's venomous words. "That's enough, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to leave, or what?" He spat, taking a menacing step closer. "You'll have your new boyfriend throw me out? This is still my neighborhood, you deadbeat." At that moment, Damien, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. His entrance was not loud or aggressive, but the shift in atmosphere was seismic. He moved with a calm but powerful authority that instantly silenced the blustering landlord. A sterile silence fell over the courtyard. "Your neighborhood?" Damien said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I believe you're mistaken," Mr. Abernathy scoffed. But there was a new flicker of fear in his eyes. "And who the hell are you?" Damien's gaze was like polished steel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He began a monologue that would completely reverse the power dynamic. A speech delivered with the cool precision of a surgeon. "My name is Damien Blackwood, and as of Tuesday afternoon, I am the owner of this building. I am also the owner of the 2 buildings adjacent to it, and the small commercial property on the corner. So, in fact, this is my neighborhood." Mr. Abernathy's jaw dropped. His face went pale, the ruddy color draining away to a pasty white. He looked from Damien's commanding face to Alara's stunned expression and back again. He began to stammer, I didn't know. The sale was anonymous?" Damien ignored him, his focus entirely on the man's cruelty. "I've reviewed your tenant records, Mr. Abernathy. Your history of illegal fees, harassment, and predatory eviction practices is extensive. Your behavior this evening was merely the final confirmation." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your management contract is terminated, effective immediately. Your own apartment, which was a condition of your employment, must be vacated within 12 hours. My security team will be here in the morning to escort you out." He then turned his back on the speechless, shattered man and looked directly at Alara. his eyes softening with a tender, protective light. He publicly offered her the salvation he had until now kept secret. "Alara," he said, his voice now gentle. "You and Lily will never have to worry about this man, or a roof over your heads, ever again. I promise you that." The landlord was left frozen, a statue of his own obsolescence. The hero had revealed himself. Later that evening, the fancy restaurant forgotten, they sat in the quiet of Alara's living room. Lily was asleep in her bedroom, clutching her new doll, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded. The air between Alara and Damien was thick with unspoken questions. He had bought the building. He was Damien Blackwood. The name tugged at her memory, but she couldn't place it. He sat across from her on the worn armchair, his impeccable suit looking out of place, yet he himself seemed perfectly at home. This was the confession scene, played out under the soft glow of her flickering lamp. He began to speak, his voice low and full of a raw, difficult honesty. "Alara, there's something you need to know. My full name is Damien Blackwood. I am the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises." Alara's blood ran cold. Blackwood Enterprises, the company that had fired her. The sterile letter, the impersonal dismissal. It was him. He was the faceless power that had shattered her life. She felt a wave of dizziness, a sense of betrayal so profound it stole her breath. All his kindness, all his help. Was it pity? Guilt? He saw the understanding, and the hurt, dawning on her face, and continued quickly, his voice laced with regret. "The layoff was a corporate decision. I signed the order. I never looked at the names, Alara. To me, they were just numbers on a spreadsheet, a percentage to meet a target. I never knew. I swear to you, I never knew it was you until I had my team find you." He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his gaze unwavering and desperate for her to believe him. "That day in the park, I was not in a good place. It was the anniversary of my son's death. He would have been 7-inch." A sob caught in his throat. He shared his tragedy, the story of a boating accident, of a bright, laughing boy swallowed by the waves. His carefully constructed world had been shattered, leaving him a hollow man going through the motions of life, encased in a shell of grief and cynicism. He told her how her daughter's simple words and her own selfless act of kindness had been the first thing to pierce that shell in 3 years. "You didn't see a rich man or a powerful CEO," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You just saw a man who was hurting. You gave me hope, Alara. You and Lily, you gave me a reason to want to feel again. When I found out who you were, that I was the cause of your hardship, it was a chance to make something right in a world that had gone so wrong." Alara listened, her initial shock and anger slowly melting away, replaced by a deep, aching empathy. She knew that kind of grief. She remembered the hollowing loss after her husband's death. She looked at this powerful, wealthy man, and all she saw was his shared humanity, his own deep wounds. She stood up, went to the kitchen, and made him a cup of tea, just as he had finished his story. A simple, grounding gesture. She placed the warm mug in his trembling hands. "My husband, Mark," she said softly, reciprocating his vulnerability. "He used to say that the deepest kindness comes from the deepest pain." She had forged a bond with him over shared grief, a connection far stronger than any corporate betrayal. He looked up at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I am so sorry, Alara." "I know," she whispered, and she did. The resolution was not just financial. It was emotional. He offered her a job, a senior position in his company's charitable foundation, a role perfect for her compassionate nature. "Not as an apology," he clarified, "but because you are the most qualified person I know to run it. You embody everything it stands for." And then, he made his romantic declaration. "You and Lily, you didn't just save me from my grief. You brought light and color back into my world. You made my house a home. I think I'm falling in love with you." Alara Vance, a single tear of her own finally fell. A tear not of sadness or fear, but of cathartic release. She had been seen. She had been saved. And she was on the precipice of a new, unimaginable hope. 1 year later, The golden glow of a late afternoon sun streamed through the large French doors of a stately but warm home, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, in a sprawling green yard, Lily's laughter pealed as she pumped her legs higher and higher on a wooden swing set. A magnificent, fully grown golden retriever, Leo, barked joyfully at her feet, chasing her shadow. Alara stood on the stone patio, a mug of tea warming her hands, watching her daughter. She wore a simple, elegant dress, and her face was relaxed, full of a deep, serene happiness. The weary lines of desperation were gone, replaced by the soft glow of love and security. A pair of strong, gentle arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. "She's getting so high," Damien said, his voice a low, happy rumble in her ear. He was no longer the haunted man from the park or the commanding CEO from the boardroom. He was just Damien, her partner, Lily's devoted stepfather. His eyes, once so full of rain, now held the clear, warm light of the sun. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play, their hands intertwined. They were a family, forged in the crucible of hardship and redeemed by a single, selfless act of kindness. Their life was not a fairy tale, but a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound love grows from the deepest roots of shared sorrow. Their happily ever after was not an ending, but a beautiful, ongoing beginning. This story is a fable for our times, a testament to the idea that the smallest act of pure, selfless kindness can create ripples that change the world. It shows us that behind the masks of power or poverty, of grief or success, we are all just human beings in need of connection. Alara's gentle heart, offered without expectation, was the key that unlocked Damien's gilded cage of sorrow, while his resources, guided by a newly awakened conscience, became the shield that protected her from the world's cruelty. Their journey reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or possessions, but in the capacity to see another's pain and offer a piece of your own light. If the story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of compassion to heal and to save, then you understand the core of our mission here. We all have moments where we are Alara, facing insurmountable odds, and moments where we have the chance to be Damien, to use what we have to lift someone else up. It is in the recognition of this shared humanity that we find our greatest strength and our most profound purpose. We pour our souls into creating these soul-stirring narratives for you. To ensure we can continue to bring more heartwarming and inspiring stories like this to the world, please show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who might need a little hope today, and most importantly, subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. We'll see you in the next one.